Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And the big news, of course, is that CCP announced the new proving grounds that should be coming to the game later this week. Rather than PvE in the Abyss, we'll have just PvP in the Abyss. My very first impression here is that CCP is taking a rather careful approach with this feature, which I can understand, because the biggest worry, I think, for the people that are against a form of instance PvP in the sandbox is that it will just take away any incentive to go roaming, to do anything but perhaps the very largest battles in nullsec. But it could really be a big problem for instance, low sec roaming that will find even fewer targets. All of those people would then transition into that new proving grounds PvP content, and that could definitely become a bit of a problem. And so I think probably in order to first be rather careful on this, CCP is at the moment planning like small leaks, you could call them, where it is a very specific format for a filament that will be available for a certain amount of days, perhaps a couple of weeks. I think it was the first one just 2v2 cruisers and a limited number of, I think, Tech 1 cruisers. Those are your options. You gotta be with two and you gotta be in one of those cruisers, and then you can use that filament. Was it for 10 days? It was something like that. After that, we were going for the 5-man free-for-all in destroyers. That one actually sounds pretty fun. I definitely think that I'm gonna plan some destroyers for that one. That again will be a limited time that only that filament will work. So all of them will basically have their own little time slots, and after that they have more of those planned up until October already. So it's not like we can just replace all our PvP action with a permanent 1v1 or something like that, which would probably put quite some pressure on some of the faction warfare content and things like that. So I think it's a good choice. Stay rather limited, keep it under your own control. That's exactly what CCP is doing, and then try to find the right formats, and honestly to try to not interfere too much with the sandbox. I think it's a very good idea that you have rather teamed and very specific formats that you make available, and then just have a regular rotation. It also, I think, means that you'll have some market play because of that. You won't just have a single ship that'll become the best at this one type of abyssal content PvP that'll then just start to be dominated, and of course will go up in price as a result. But no, you'll have a constant rotation. This week you'll have to be in a team. This week you'll be able to enjoy it solo. This week it's in an expensive ship. Next week it's in very inexpensive ship, so you can really start to try and go out there and chain those filaments. I think that that's a good idea, and should keep the impact in check and give CCP plenty of time to basically see where they want to go with this type of feature. In other news, the war drums are beating. I do keep an eye on the EVE Online subreddit, of course, and well, there's quite a bit of very funny propaganda going about between the Imperium, and then we've got mostly Test, right, with the dinosaur. Those two do seem to be very popular. Let's hope that it becomes a hot war, but that is of course something that the players decide and not CCP. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the New Eden store. Let's see what's available here. We get some bundles front and center, and we actually have a new skin that is no longer the Triglavian versus Edencom skin. This is called the Starline Majestic skin. We get Guardian, Drake, Crane. Down here we get the Abaddon, and then some larger ships. Revelation, Avatar, Phoenix and Leviathan. Not symmetrical, white grayish with a little bit of a red tint on the side there as well, some blue in there, so I think it's okay. I definitely think it's a pretty good looking skin. But right now, yeah, my focus is definitely not in skins. But if you want a new option for one of these ships, you can definitely go and take a look at the New Eden store. And I guess that means that we'll be moving on to the market, which is of course why everyone is here. We'll start with some Plex and stuff at 440. Let's go. As always, we will start with Plex, and you may already have seen it from the ticker. Sellers in Jita are down to just over 2.6 million, so a bit more pressure on the price. Buyers, though, are below 2.5 million. Sellers in the player-owned trade hubs are just below 2.6 million for the first one as well, but the buyers are staying very close to this current range, which means that the chart is actually again bouncing very close to 2.5 million for the average price. It means that you can buy Plex for 2.5 million. We've been below that a little bit late May, but we bounced back up from that opportunity very quickly. You can also see that the volumes went up all of a sudden by perhaps 10-20% or something like that to cause the increased price. So do keep in mind, anything below 2.5 million, it really looks in the last couple of months like the market already saw that as a good deal, as something that's worth it as an investment at the low end for Plex. I personally think that that we will see that pressure mount perhaps a little bit more, especially now because that dev blog was released on the economic numbers for Q1. CCP very clearly stated that they feel the lower Plex prices are a good thing because it's a sign that they're successful against the botting efforts in EVE Online. It's gonna be partly true. In my talk about it, I definitely said that I don't think it's the only thing that's happening with the prices of Plex, but it's definitely gonna be a major part of it, and as a result I do think that players may expect even worse times, you could say, for Plex prices, or better times, because lots of people of course agree that low Plex prices are a good thing. But yeah, keep in mind, my warning is that inflation in ISK is practically inevitable in a game like EVE Online, and so at some point that force is going to take over. We'll start to go back up in price for Plex. On the longer term, I do feel like this is a good investment, but could we be in for another leg down? Could we be in for like below 2.5 million and perhaps even close to 2 million? It is entirely possible, of course, because right now it is under pressure, very clearly so, and you definitely have the developer saying, hey, that's actually a sign that we're doing our work against bots. So it is seen as a good thing across the board, and that could just continue to exacerbate things as people become a little bit more wary of, should I really be holding these Plex now? Because everyone seems to agree that the lower we go, the better it is. So that's also part of it in the market, of course, is the psychology of people, and right now it looks like lower prices are actually considered to be a good thing by everyone. That just creates more opportunities, and in my opinion, it entirely also follows my own warning that I always give you guys. This does look like a great time to buy Plex, but don't spend all your ISK, everything that you have available into Plex right now. Make sure that you have some powder left so that you can buy if they go even lower. Next up, the multiple pilot train certificates. We're seeing some more pressure on this one as well. Average prices bouncing between 1.2 billion almost and 1.4 billion. That's actually quite a little bit of volatility on these daily averages, and we are currently on a low side, with sellers coming in at less than 1.3 billion and buyers a bit above 1.2 billion. That is of course going to be because Plex prices are in pressure as well. It doesn't make much sense for either of these to compare it to a full monthly subscription, which I think here is going to be a little bit below 1.3 billion or very close to that. Well, multiple pilot train certificates cannot demand 1.4 billion when 500 Plex go for much less than that. So there is definitely that correlation, although it is not as direct as, for instance, Plex to skill extractors, which we'll take a look at right now, because there's like a one-on-one conversion of these. These ones are also showing some more pressure at the tail end, far more, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's actually very, very similar indeed. Pulling away from 300 million ISK at this point, 288 million for the sellers, 281 million for the buyers. Again, a closing of the gap is clearly happening between sellers and buyers. Buyers are not really trying to drive the price even lower that often, although they'll probably be trying, but demand is just high enough to keep asking for a similar price there. But it's the sellers that are becoming more and more aggressive to try and get their sales going, driving the average prices back down to, again, very close to that previous low point, which is going to be around 200 and a little bit below 290. So more pressure clearly visible here. Are we in for another leg down? Again, it's very difficult to say at this point. So do I think a skill extractor is a good purchase at this point? Look at this chart. To me, it makes a lot of sense. But again, don't just buy every skill extractor that you can. Perhaps have one or two. Keep an eye on the market. If we do go another leg down, you can buy a couple more. For the skill injectors next, here are the large skill injectors that are at the moment feeling that same pressure, heading towards 700 million ISK slowly. 719 million for the sellers, 690 for the buyers. That's still a pretty decent margin between sellers and buyers there, showing that there's going to be a little bit more pressure on the sellers, I think, in the upcoming days. And look at where we come from, almost a billion ISK, and we're now heading down to 700 million. That is yeah, like a third of the price. That is a pretty significant decrease, although most of it, of course, most of the time we've spent 800, 850, and now we're spending it at around 700 million ISK for these large skill injectors. You can definitely try to grab one below 700 million ISK. I think that makes a lot of sense if you're looking for those investments, but it's the very same story. How long can that pressure keep up? Right now, everyone, I think, is of the opinion that these lower prices are a good thing. And I personally also feel like skill points are not really that hot a commodity at the moment. The Eden ships seem to be, for a lot of players, rather disappointing, or a lot of players, I think, will also be like myself. I'm very happy that I got quite a few skill books for free. I put them in, training them to 5 right now, and that just basically gives me a lot of time to enjoy the game in different facets until my skill training is ready, and that's when I'll jump in, buy a couple of Eden ships, perhaps the other skill books as well, then the fittings, and it'll be perhaps a month, perhaps even 2 months from now before I really decide on a purchase of like a Stormbringer and try to find uses for that ship. So lots of players, I think, will also be very patient in these facets, probably because, well, they're not considered overpowered at all. So there is no need to rush into Eden ship skill points at this time, because you could expect CCP to perhaps need to do a little bit more of a balancing path, which, well, they're not that fast to do either. So, yeah, patience, I think, can at the moment keep skill point prices down as well. And of course, that means pressure from Plex, pressure from who the hell wants skill points right now, and that just means that we are continuing to go down for the large skill injectors as well. The small skill injectors next, these are starting to flatten out as we stay below 150 million for the average price, 146 million for the sellers and 135 million for the buyers, 10 million margin between these two. Still a little bit of room for pressure, but not that much anymore. And I would say that this also, of course, is a rather juicy chart. We start at 200 million, we are down to the 140 million range right now. I think that's very easy to try to grab one at around that price. Yeah, should definitely be possible. And the average prices, though, are staying very close to those sellers. So don't try to buy like 100 of them at 140 here on the buy prices. That's just gonna spook the market. But 1 or 2 I do think is possible. And that again is my advice in all of this. It looks like a really good time to invest, but who knows, another leg down is definitely possible as well. Then we have the daily alpha injectors that try to climb back to 40 million, almost got there and are now back under pressure a little bit. 37 million for the sellers and 33.5 million for the buyers right here. The only exception, which I think is kind of normal as well, of course, daily alpha injectors are a different thing in a very different price category as well. And you know, those alpha players may find quite a bit more use for that, trying to get into new ships and trying to get that daily boost from the daily alpha injector, may be in a little bit higher demand at the moment, as I think a lot of new players are taking a look at the game right now. I mean, keeping an eye on the subreddit, we are seeing, I am personally seeing more threads than what I'm used to through summertime of like new players trying the game out and things like that. I think some of the news items lately may have driven some players to come and take a look at it for the first time. And then, of course, as an alpha player, I can fully imagine that, okay, what I enjoy exploration, or I enjoy this aspect of the game, and you have a very clear goal here: make 35 million, something like that, buy yourself a daily alpha injector, get that boost toward the ship that you want for even more efficiency, and that becomes like a goal that alpha clone players, I think, can work on the regular, creating a little bit more demand, looking at it from where the bottom has been for daily alpha injectors compared to large scale injectors and small scale injectors. And finally, we've got the hypercores that are flattening out above 280,000 disk. In fact, nope, that seems to be wrong. Kind of strange. We are flattening out above 280, but sellers are coming in at 270 in the perimeter trade tower. Okay, that just means that trade of hypercores is being dominated in GTA 4.4 itself. 281,000 for the sellers here and 255 for the buyers. Yeah, the Hypernet relay, it does have its use in GTA local, but outside of that, I think it is rather limited. Moving on, let's take a look at the minerals at 1525. Like that. As always, we'll start with titanium that on the average prices managed to stay above 7 ISK, which is very good news for the miners, of course. If we would break through that, we would get back close to that 6.5 average for the first part of the year, and that would potentially mean that well, either demand is down or supplies have come back to levels that were there before the nerf of 0.0 anomalies and all the changes that happened to try and create a resource crunch. But there's a little bit of a bounce if we go for GTA itself. 707, one recent order, it was around 720 for the first seller when I was making the ticker just a couple of minutes ago. Well, at this point, probably about half an hour ago, and the buyers are staying above 7 ISK, 706 here, 705 there. So that does mean that we have decently strong demand and not really overwhelming supply just yet, and we are managing to stay above 7 ISK for titanium, which is not extremely good, but it is definitely a very reasonable price in my personal experience when it comes to mining, even in HiSec. You know, Veldspar, dense Veldspar, stuff like that is definitely worthwhile at the moment. Let's see if the others have been able to defend their ranges. Pyrite also struggling, but still staying above 7 ISK as well. 730 for the sellers, 693 for the buyers. Here they are trying to go below that. And the worrying thing is that we still have like almost 1 billion units in just 2 sell orders here below 750. That is, of course, going to keep things in check here, unfortunately. But it is still not too worrying. I mean, compared to the first half of the year, 7 ISK here is not bad at all. After that, we have the Mixelon chart that was doing really well, and that is very good news. We actually have a breakout to 100 ISK again for Mixelon on the chart. We're talking 120 in fact for the sellers, 91 for the buyers. I think you know, if you're mining, what you want to focus on this week. Find ores that create Mixelon, because this is definitely a very, very good price. We started the year at 60 ISK. We're double that at the moment. Low point was 40 ISK. We're triple that at the moment. I think here we could have wartime preparations that are playing their part. Before all of the resource changes, I personally think that moon mining is what Nullsec ended up using. It's an adaptation that they did during the blackout, where they did switch to some more moon mining, and what they tried to produce there was the stuff that they were lacking. And their first bottleneck before all of the resource bonanza periods has always been Mixelon, because that is one thing that they would run out of first, basically, if their industry would be going all out. Same thing with Noxium a little bit, although it is different because Noxium does have more sources available in different places. But Mixelon, definitely that bottleneck, and I think here we are returning to that. The war drums are beating in 0.0. I think that they are upping their production, trying to make some more last minute, perhaps capital ship caches, perhaps some extra super capitals, anything that they can. If the conflict does become massively hot and they have to throw everything at it, well, the ones that have the most reserves and the most ships, of course, ought to have a better chance at winning, and that means that they need more Mixelon, and as a result they're willing to pay 120 ISK to buy it from here, from HiSec. That is an extremely high price for Mixelon. Even historically speaking, I think this is one of the top prices. And so that is, of course, very good news for us miners, that now have a very clear winner in what they should be focusing on. Mexalon, guys. Mine that and you'll get quite a bit of ISK per hour, quite a bit of ISK per cubic meter as well for your efforts. Really good news. After that we have Isogen that managed to get above 25 ISK, doesn't manage to maintain that, but let's see how far from 20 we are. We're still at 24.72, so almost 25 ISK for the sellers, and we have some buyers coming in at 24 ISK. That is still well away from that 20 which we saw in February, which was already after the announcement and the anomaly changes, and before that we were at 15 ISK, so still a decently strong upwards margin here for Isogen, meaning that mining for Isogen is far more efficient than, let's say, a year ago or even 6 months ago. That is still good news as well. So a bit of pressure on titanium, but that one is finally stopping and staying above 7 ISK. Same thing with pyrite. I think it's some reserves that were unlocked here below 750. We still have that billion units here. I personally am reading this as someone still had that lying around and said, I'm gonna try to sell right now because that pressure we may not see 8 ISK again, and as a result now we are going to be moving in this small band between 7 and 730-ish, 750-ish perhaps, because of all of that pyrite that's still available on the market. But the real question is, of course, can we get through all of this? Can we chew through those final reserves, those final stockpiles that speculators may still have lying around? And then can we keep asking those higher prices? Can we maintain that value for mining efforts in EVE Online? It's the goal from CCP. It was clearly stated in that dev blog as well. So I personally do think that we will see that that maintained higher price for minerals. After that we have the Noxium market, and well, my prediction sort of came true. We actually have a breakout to more than 400 ISK, 432 for the sellers, 400 for the buyers. So double spike here when the CCP announced the crunch in resource availability. And now here I think again, same like with Mexalon, that this does have to do with bottlenecks in 0.0 production, where I do think that the gears of industry are running overtime at the moment. After that we have Zydrine that is staying above 1000 ISK. Very, very impressive, doubled the price over the last year, and basically a late bloomer when it comes to all of these announcements. You only have a jump up to 625 in February, where CCP announced, hey, we're gonna change things, we're gonna make things less available, and then it went up another 40% after that. Very, very impressive. 1029 ISK for the first seller, going up to 1040 very quickly, 978 for the buyers. And you should really notice here, these average prices are once again completely dictated by the sellers, and this despite the fact that volumes aren't back up there at the moment. So it's really a complete lack of availability in my opinion for Zydrine. There's just not that many sellers out there. They don't have that much extra Zydrine to try and turn into ISK at the moment. And that means we get these crazy high prices that, despite the fact that it's just a couple 100,000 for most sell orders, and then we get a couple million on some of the others, and yet they dictate the price completely. After that we have the megasite market that seems to be in a different spot. I personally think that perhaps the Edencom sites, where those that are successfully defended by Edencom do create sources of megasite and morphite, that is adding to the profits, but perhaps there is just too much Zydrine needed in the economy that people are just grabbing everything that they can compared to megasite, and as a result we actually have a pullback from 600 ISK. We have a 50% increase from the low to the high. Well, no, actually it's almost doubling as well here from December, 300 ISK to 600 ISK, but we already have a pretty strong pullback that's just continuing. 527 for most sellers, 487 for most buyers, and here this is definitely a strange and different behavior here, where we do have a seller that's coming in at 487.10. He's saying, I need to get rid of that. Well, honestly, those 10 cents are probably not worth the sell order. You should have just sold them straight to this buyer, or have the patience and put it up at 526 or something like that. You will sell your megasite as well, but it is not as dominated by stronger demand than supply as Zydrine, as we can clearly see from the price pulling back. And then we have morphite that went to like 11,000 ISK I think, and then bounced back a little bit from that. 14,640 for the sellers. That's definitely a pretty big jump up. And then 11,690 for the buyers. Still a healthy way away from 10,000 disc where we started the year at. And where I would say below that price, we can slowly start to either not sell your Morphite or slowly purchase it. We don't get to that point just yet here for Morphite. Here again, I think same with Megasite and Morphite. It's the availability that has increased through the Triglavian versus Edencom content, because those ores that you can mine there actually yields pretty much everything. All right, that means we now get to move on to the PI market coming in at 25 minutes. Like that. So it is still flowing into minerals, I think, with production focusing on ships in 0-0. With Plex prices under pressure, are we going to see something different here in the PI market? Here is the broadcast nodes. At least we're pulling away from that 1 year low. Last week we're basically a couple of months of pressure, and then we definitely reached a pronounced 1 year low with an average price below 1.7 million. That is kind of crazy. And we're at 1.8 million for the sellers and 1.75 million for the buyers. Very noticeable. There's basically zero margin between sellers and buyers here, and there's definitely still some desperate sellers on the market as well that are willing to dump their broadcast nodes for less than 1.8 million. So we're still seeing pressure. We are perhaps seeing a little bit more demand as the gap has closed on the upside from that 1 year low point. Construction blocks had done a little bit of a jump as well, is back under pressure. Sellers are trying to maintain 10,000 disc, but they're not succeeding. So again, showing that that oversupply is still a big part of the equation. But 8,500 disc, and at least I can browse a little bit more in these buyers. So I'm seeing a slight uptick in demand from the complete lack of it, which like in early June for the broad construction blocks meant that we actually had average prices of 7,600 discs for something that should be above 10k on average. That is kind of crazy. Consumer electronics next did make their way back to 11k on 2 occasions at around early June. It is to no avail. We are back to 10k around that price for average, and again sellers coming in for less than that pretty aggressively. Just on this page we're going from 10,200 down to 9,650 for the next sellers, and buyers have closed the gap though. 9,530 as well here, closing that gap on those most aggressive sellers. For our coolants market, that is different. So these first three are actually not tied to fuels, and what I'm seeing here is we're still oversupplied, but at least demand seems to be picking up a little bit, closing that gap between sellers and buyers. For coolants tied to fuels, yeah, it is terrible news. 9,640, we also have that supply that's just driving the price back down, but this is just massive amounts of it because right now they're just competing with each other in much smaller margins, and it just keeps coming. And here the buyers are saying, you know what, there's no need to rush. Less than 7,500 disc please for those coolants. 7,429, almost 10k for the averages. And look at where we're going on the average prices. That means that people are dumping their coolants to these buy prices. You are able to buy coolants for less than 7,500 disc. Average price should be 11,500. That is a massive margin. I myself produce coolants. We're just hoarding that. I'm not selling that at all. Cryoprotectant solutions have finally stabilized a bit above 100,000 disc here. 130 almost for the sellers, 115 for the buyers. I think that this makes a lot more sense and does agree with my theory. When we were going down here, I said the danger is that we basically oversupply the market temporarily, because I do think that there's reasons to think that, photon projectors, things like that CCP is not done yet with the implant sets, and that this was a bit of an opportunity. And well, some speculators must have agreed with that. Look at the volume spike that drove the price back up to 160,000, and now we're landing, they said 100,000, that's the price that we had before all of these new implants drove demand up. That seems very reasonable to me. They snagged everything that was really cheap, and as a result now we're re-landing, but at a much more reasonable place. 130,000 disc for the sellers is a decent margin away from that 130, 110 that we had before all of these new implants. I think it makes a lot of sense. Enriched uranium tied to fuels, yeah, more of that really bad news. Starts the year at 15,000 discs. Right now we're at 10,000 discs, 10,670 for the sellers. Here the buyers are starting to come in close to those sellers, or is it just that the sellers have crashed down that much? I think that's basically the case, because we are below 10,000 discs for the buyers of enriched uranium, which is very, very cheap again as well. Integrity response drones, that one is not following the broadcast nodes, so it looks like for the broadcast nodes a week ago, 10 days ago, they're buying less than 1.7 million was the right choice. And then, as I've, I keep saying that warning, but I think it's pretty damn important. Don't go in and think I'm buying everything right now and that's going to be my winning strategy. That rarely happens. And integrity response drones, for instance, last week you could say, all right, 1.8 million seems like the right time to buy. And now you can see that we do go another leg down. We had average prices of 1.64 million yesterday. That's kind of crazy. 1.72 million for the sellers, and look at that lack of demand, less than 1.5 million for the buyers. And considering what the average prices are doing, you are buying integrity response drones for less than 1.5 million, which is definitely very, very low compared to an almost 2.5 million average price. So here, we go down to yet another 1 year low point, which was kind of unexpected, of course, but hopefully you still have some powder left in the cake so that you can try to take advantage of that, because I mean, here that does start to really make sense. 1.5 million integrity response drones. I'd love to have some of those. Next up, we have the mechanical parts that are staying below 10,000 disc. Not great, 10,260 for the sellers, but 8,185 for the buyers. Again, tied to fuels, and we do have a lot more pressure from the lack of demand here. A much wider margin as well, with average prices at 9,500. It means that people are actually selling to these buyers as well at the moment. Not as aggressively in some of the other goods, but it is definitely still happening. Organic mortar applicators, same thing. You'd think that 800,000 disc or a bit above that would be the limit, and now in the last couple of days we're actually breaking through that as the average price. And in fact, this is really very strange, but sellers have no patience whatsoever. Some people are coming in and just selling at 800,000 and less than that, 799 for the cheapest seller right now, and buyers are able to go down even lower, 775,000. Now here, of course, we do have a little bit of competition that starts, because if you're buying organic mortar applicators that normally go for 1 million and above that, for 800,000 and below, that does start to be pretty damn interesting. So here again, another leg down, another 1 year low point, and another buy opportunity to grab, in my opinion, some cheap organic mortar applicators. Robotics is perhaps showing one sign of turning the corner. We're away from 85,000 on the upside, 89,000 for the sellers and 84,000 for the buyers. Still, this is not like a massive sell opportunity or something like that. We do have a steady increase in volumes that has reached a crescendo, you could say, 3 days ago. That has driven the price back up, but will this momentum be maintained? Well, we've seen that before in the last couple of months, not necessarily. If I look at what's happening in coolants, if I look at what's happening in mechanical parts, I would say that no, this is just going to be a temporary small bounce. If you have to sell your robotics, you can try to do so right now, but honestly, I'd just be patient and wait for better times. Self-harmonizing power cores is trying to do the same thing, is not there yet. We went very close to 1.5 million as the low point, then we bounced back to 175, even some average prices of 1.9, which, this all happened on an investment spree. You can clearly see that from this volume increase, but now oversupply is taking over again. Less than 1.7 million for the sellers, less than 1.6 million for the buyers, is driving that price back down again. So you can buy some cheap self-harmonizing power cores. It's not as good as our integrity response drones chart, but it is definitely very, very reasonable. Superconductors, something that I produce and is doing surprisingly well, getting back above 12,500 again, 12,670 for one seller, 13,700 for most sellers and 12,660 for the buyers. That is one of the real exceptions here, which I'm very surprised by. Quite a bit of volatility, but able to maintain those average prices quite well, showing some sell opportunities, showing some demand. Superconductors for some reason are doing really well. Then we have our test cultures that are going back down. 8,600 for the sellers, 8,000 for the buyers. I mean, it's not that bad considering this full 1 year chart, but of course if we've gone up to above 15k, this does feel kind of bad to have to sell test cultures at this price. But keep in mind, looking at the full 1 year chart, this is actually an okay price. And then finally we have our wetware mainframes. Ouch, again. Yeah, you'd think below 1.75 million, 1 year low points, this is it, I gotta buy my wetware mainframes. And some people did. Look at this volume spike, look at this volume spike, driving the price back above 1.75, and now look at what's happening. We're going down to less than 1.5 million ISK. This is nuts. 1.43 million 1.438 million for the sellers, 1.4 million for one buyer, and that is it. Now this is, I think, a textbook example of a complete lack of demand. Here there's definitely some really cheap wetware mainframes to bring in, and the market just keeps surprising me. Especially in these advanced PI materials, with the crazy lack of any patience for these sellers. This just feels like completely bonkers to me. Wetware mainframes that should go for well above 2 million ISK are now just being dumped at 1.4 million. Kind of crazy, definitely something to look into as well, I think. But again, I would try to just put up a buy price. And hope that that gets triggered, because then you're buying so much below the chart here that it just has to be pretty damn good to hold them. Again, not with all your ISK, but some wetware mainframes that you bought for like 1.4 million. I think I would love to have those in the cargo hold. After that, we have our advanced moon materials coming in at 3610. Let's go over these, and I think here we mostly will have to be hunting for potential influences of the war drums, because last week I think almost everything was under pressure. And so does that change? Well, for crystalline carbonates, that's a no. Bouncing off of 130, I mean, that's a 1 year low point, so that makes sense just from an investment perspective. 136 for the sellers, 129.5 for the buyers. Very, very low price, clearly well below average. Ferrite carbide next actually did a little bit of a bounce from that 125 low point, but is it working its way back to the 140 range? 135, still too much pressure for that. 125 for the buyers. Trading below average, it's away from that 1 year low point. Then we have our titanium carbide that also does a bounce, right? Went to 125. Bounces back but stays below average. 148.5 for the sellers, 140 for the buyers. Not even on a volume increase, so here this is really just the market setting itself up for potentially, I think, just taking into account that potentially we'll see some action in nullsec, and they're saying those 1 year low points, they don't make too much sense. Tungsten carbide, for instance, 191 again for the sellers, 185 for the buyers. That's, you know, close to the average, perhaps even slightly above that. Here I really think that we dropped off on oversupply. The war drums start to beat, and then people just in general say, you know what, I'm not just gonna keep dumping at these low prices. We're gonna wait for those averages to come back, which happened pretty damn quickly as nobody was willing to sell at those low prices. And so here it's basically, I think, just the market keeping in mind that potentially we have that nullsec conflict coming. Let's see if the metamaterials are following suit. Photonic metamaterials are pulling back above 15k, I believe. 15,400 for the sellers, 15,000 for the first buyer. I think that's the exact same thing happening here. You can also see that the volumes are down a little bit. Plasmonic metamaterials next, also pulling away from that low point, getting back above 20k. Almost 21,000 for the sellers, above 20,000 for the buyers as well. This is definitely, for me personally, confirming the story. Non-linear metamaterials staying below average, but pulling away from that 20k low point again. 21,000 for the sellers, 2,400 for the buyers. And then terahertz metamaterials just recovering from a close to 1 year low point at 18,000 disc, and we are back at 19,380 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. What are the volumes doing here? They're staying around average. I really do feel like, at least for these items, for the Tech 2 production items, that it has a lot to do with, I'm not gonna dump 1 year low points when potentially there's a war around the corner, but nobody is going to buy massively overpriced or go crazy with speculating on these items and willing to buy at any price either. It's just a small correction in the price, pulling away from those low points, which makes total sense, I think. Fermionic condensates also trying to slowly get back above 80,000 disc here, 82,000 for the sellers, 78 for the buyers. Ferrogel is actually going back down a little bit away from that 40k, not able to maintain it. 37,000 for the sellers, 36,000 for the buyers. If you go below 35,000, I think you do have a enticing buy price. Fullerides are finally seeing some pressure as well, so definitely not doing badly. 1186 for the sellers and above 1,000 disc for the buyers. Considering this 1 year chart is a pretty damn good price, but we are seeing volumes increase and pressure build. I do think that there's some more supply that's coming in here. Could just be the exact same thing. We're starting to dump some of our positions as well now that we can, before who knows what happens next. Hypersynaptic fibers pulling back from 10,000 to 11,000 discs. Very same pattern, slight increase in volumes here for this one, but it's nothing like really too dramatic. Nanotransistors, 5,500-ish, I think. Yep, exactly. 5,543 for the sellers, 5,227 for the buyers. Just moving back from basically a high average price to right in the middle of this 1 year chart. Phenolic composites did that massive dip last week, or was it 2 weeks ago at this point, went to 1625, a 1 year low point. And this is of course the slightly worrying part of this, is that the volumes, they just aren't there. Nobody's trying to really take advantage of that dip in phenolic composites. We're still below 1700 for the sellers and below 1500 for the buyers. This one is just not hot at the moment. Ceramic fibers continuing its slow decline below 350 as well, 346 to 335. Yeah, not yet at the 1 year low point, so I would look out for 300 on the buy prices before I would make a move. And in general here, I'm basically seeing a little bit of price setting that I think is starting to incalculate the potential war in 0.0, but there's nothing really dramatic. The general sense is we're still below average on most of these. We're not massively oversupplied, but we're slightly oversupplied for current demand. You could see this one, phenolic composites, as one opportunity to still step in at a 1 year low point, but the fact that it's taking this long to just recover a little bit, volumes aren't there, does have me a little bit worried. I would not buy too much of it either. Let's move on to the Tech 2 ships then, coming in at 4210. Like that, and let's see if we see differences here. Last week, honestly, it was all about lots of pressure in these Tech 2 ships, so I have bought my positions mostly, I think, unless something really drastic shows up here. I think we're gonna leave it at that, hope for better times and try to get some sales in. But here is the Ares, still under pressure, 22 million for the sellers, 22 million for the buyers. That is pretty damn narrow margin for a Tech 2 ship, I have to say. Most sellers are coming in at 24 million, so this is obviously still very low at the moment. If you don't have your Ares investment just yet, I think it's a good time to do so, especially if you want a couple of extra that never really is a bad thing in my opinion. If you buy a couple of interceptors, they're awesome travel ships, everyone can use them. Even if you don't necessarily have a profit on it in the upcoming weeks or months, at least you have the ships, you're able to fly them, and you bought them at a 1 year low price. After that, we've got the Basilisk. That one made its way back to 230, showing some pressure again. Low point 190 for the average price, 205 for the sellers, 193 for the buyers. A bit too early, but the pressure in the Tech 2 ship market seems to become more and more uniform. Cerberus landing on 200 million. If you look at this chart, that looks very interesting. 209, almost 210 for the sellers, 194 million for the buyers. Get rid of these 3 buyers, and then I think you definitely want to put up a buy order here for like around 180. This could be just a touch too early. Hopefully these 3 buy orders still get filled in, but 8, 4, these are definitely some speculators saying if I can buy that Cerberus at 194, sell it for 280, I got a good trade, and I can't blame them for doing that. So decently aggressive buyers here, a couple of them at least. It's your choice to make. Do you want to compete with them, or do you want to hope that those orders get filled and that you have a better opportunity? Both I think are possibilities. The Crow continuing to also show signs of pressure, getting back to 22.5 for the sellers, and that is really not good. Of course, if you want higher prices, 537 units right here, that's a lot. That's gonna keep things in check, and now we are buying these for almost 18 million ISK. That is very, very low as well. Guardian, after that lovely spike here up to 300 million ISK, is going back down substantially, getting very close to that 1-year low point as well. And yeah, this is very nice for people that still want to buy a cheap Guardian. 175.6 for the buyers, 218 for the sellers. Decent margin between these two. But you can definitely try to grab one, let's say below 180 million. That would make a lot of sense. If we look at mine, I bought it for 184, and I'm already pretty damn happy with that, because a sale at 250 would be very nice. This is like one of those textbook examples that I would say where, okay, I bought a little bit too early, but I still think I got a great price for that Guardian, and I'm basically ready for this downturn. If I really see an incredible opportunity, I may buy a second one. I've got the ISK for it, but right now I feel quite okay with my one investment, and I'd rather diversify than double down at this point. Next up, we've got the Hawk that's pulling away from that low point, trying to get back towards 35 million here, 34.4 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. It is still pretty low, definitely not a breakout. Then we've got the Heretic that went up above 70 million ISK. Let's take a look at that. 73 million for the sellers, 60 million for the buyers here. I was just too late, I think, on my trying to sell for 89 million. Supply has closed that gap very quickly, so I may as well cancel the order, but on the off chance that we have another complete purchase of the Heretic, I'll keep it up there for the 3 months that I paid for anyways through the fees. But this was some surprise volatility. I mean, I had to risk it. I had to put up the sell order, hope that it triggers, because that was one that I had bought for 52 million. That would be insane profit on a single ship trade. Next up here, we've got the Hound bouncing back to an above 25 million range, 27.6 for the sellers, 21 million still for the buyers. That is still pretty damn cheap. If we try to get 21 million to show up here, it's going to be down here somewhere. The Ishtar is just showing that indeed the Tech 2 ship market, I think in general, is under pressure a little bit, clearly going below 230 million, which is something that we haven't seen that often in the last year, except for this period of volatility early on. 220 for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. Very same thing as what I've said with the Aries. If you want to really invest into an Ishtar right now, buy it for close to 200 million. It's definitely not a bad price to step in, and you have an Ishtar, especially if you can use it. It makes a lot of sense. I have 4 or 5 of those already, so not sure if I need to double down on that, but it makes sense to especially try to invest in some of the ships that you can use, that you have use for as well. Here's the Manticore getting back down to 25 million. Look at this volume here as well. Is it supply? Well, we're down to 26 million for the sellers, 23.6 million for the buyers. I do think it's just more ships coming to the market, driving those prices back down, showing the pressure. It's not even that many of them, but buyers are at, what was it, 23.6, so below 24 million. Let's see if we can get that to show up here. That is below 24 million. That is definitely pretty cheap as well. A couple of Manticores would make sense. Do I have Manticores, or have I done those trades on the previous volatility? I don't have them. Could still go in for a couple of Manticores myself here. After that, we've got the Munin showing first signs of, again, war preparations, I think. Big volume spike driving the price back from 210 on the average up to 250 million. We're talking 257 for the sellers, 210 to 11 for the buyers. Pretty wide margin. So yes, we do have Nosek, I think, coming in here, buying a Munin fleet, seeing the opportunity to buy it well below average, but also the price is not like a complete breakout to 300 million or anything like that just yet. Then we get the Nemesis showing more pressure again. 1 year low point is 20 million. Let's keep that in mind. 23.5 for the sellers, 21 million for the buyers. So pretty narrow margin, and 600 here is going to keep things in check for the foreseeable future as well. Oneros diving down to 1 year low point of 160 million. Just complete lack of demand. 168 million for the sellers, 145 for the buyers. At this point, sure, try to buy an Oneros, let's say below 150 million. It makes a lot of sense. Keep one thing in mind though, with the Oneros, 25 units a day is the high end of the volume, so it's going to be very difficult to get that sale going. On the other hand, super pronounced 1 year low point, so one Oneros, it does make sense, I think. The Purifier is flat above 25 million, 26 million, 26.5 million for the sellers, 22.7 million for the buyers, and here again 339, keeping things basically in check, keeping a stopgap basically on the volatility at the moment. It creates buy opportunities from time to time. It does mean that I think you have to be patient when it comes to those investments. Perhaps the war could bring change to that, of course. The Saber continuing to be under pressure. Look at that, prices keep going down on volume spikes. I think that just means more supply coming in. 60 to 61 million for the sellers, 55 million for the buyers. Definitely at the cheap end of the spectrum right now. I think I've got Sabers ready for 57 million. So you can definitely try to do better by a couple million, but I'm again ready and pretty happy where I bought my Sabers at. Scimitar showing that same pressure yet again, below 200 million for the average price, 204 for the sellers, 187 for the buyers. Look at the lack of buyers, pretty pronounced here as well. Bit of a volume increase, so could see a change, or is it a lot of supply? It's a decent amount of supply, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Okay, I'm not sure. Buy it below 190. Let's try to get 190 to show on the chart. Not yet the 1 year low point, but definitely not bad either. And then we've got the Zarmas that's actually doing well, getting above 400 million a couple of days ago. Right now, sellers coming in at 400, buyers at 356. So Triglavians still pretty damn hot commodities. I think Triglavian ships, I'm gonna say. So the Tech 2 ship market, there is opportunities. If you follow my videos more closely, you know that I actually have quite some stuff ready. I've got Ares ready, got Guardian ready, got Hawks, got Hounds, got Loki Legions as well, Purifiers, Sabers. I have those ready in small numbers. I don't invest with billions at a time in a single trade, but yes, I basically have quite a few of those ready. You know, maybe one on Eros. I never really do it because of the low volumes here, but this is a very juicy chart, and I think Manticore also would make sense to try to load up on the final stealth bomber that I don't have, I think, and just hope basically that Nosek does explode and that we could see some sell opportunities. Right now though, a lot of these frigates are oversupplied by hundreds of ships. They are keeping things in check, and so I think that's just basically extending our window for bargain hunting. Tech 3 ships next, that's coming in at 52.25. Like that. Let's take a look here at these destroyers. First of all, Confessor flattening out below 40 million. That makes a lot of sense. Slight edge up on the average prices. 38 million for the sellers, 32 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, 4 sell orders. 81.48 is perhaps a little bit at the high end of the volumes that you would expect, but it definitely feels very reasonable if we look at how long a lot of these sell orders have been going for here. Next up, we've got the Hecate that is also below 40 million, slight edge up at the tail end here. We're talking just below 40 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, and here the increased number of sell orders in the last 24 hours makes sense as long as this ends up being like the most expensive one. So here full page, a little bit more than that, of fresh Hecates going for almost 40 million ISK, keeping the price from going any higher. What's the Jackdaw at? Was breaking out to 50 million, is making its way back down to 47 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. So this is actually not exactly what I expected. I thought we would see then the pressure on the confessor drop substantially, so not see 48 and 81 here, but much lower numbers, and in fact prices that would start to go back up. Hecate should stall here, but on lower volumes in the last 24 hours, and we should have seen the Hecate get filled up, Jackdaw, excuse me, get filled up to a price closer to 40 million. That hasn't materialized yet. Perhaps we are still a little bit too fresh from that spike up to 50 million for that industry response, but we'll have to see next week. I personally do think that next week we should see slightly higher prices if everything is back on basically the normal market forces taking over the destroyer markets, which I'm hoping for, kinda. We should see the confessor actually go back up in price on not enough supply. The Hecate probably maintain its price of around 40 million, but not see that much new supply. And then we should see the Jackdaw drop down on new ships, because what are you going to try to bring to the market right now? Confessors? No, it should really be Jackdaw. So let's see if that happens next week. Let's try to make a mental note of that. Does Jackdaw pull back, and does it create some more breathing room for especially the Hecate and the confessor? And as finally we get this Vapel that's flat at its well below average price right now, 35 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. Here almost half a page, no, 1, 2, 3, 4 new sell orders in the last 24 hours, 1 as the latest ones, 11 here competing just below 35 million. Well, it is the least popular tactical destroyer, so here this doesn't feel out of line for me personally, and should not interfere too much in this story here. Perhaps it gets a little bit of extra breathing room and can go a little bit higher in those sell prices. We'll see. Next week is going to be pretty important in my book, just to see if we do have that basically period of volatility be over, and that we can get back to less speculative moves but more predictable moves in the tactical destroyer market here. So you have that spike here from the confessor, then you had this in the Hecate, 90 million ISK, yeah, that was a little bit much, and then here it all started off with the Jackdaw going to 70 million. So is that period over? I personally think so, but it needs to be confirmed basically in the upcoming week, I would say. For the cruisers, we have the Legion that is staying well below average, 140 for the first seller, 128 for the buyers. I think I have one bought at 135, so again a little bit early, but I think if you look at this full 1 year chart, not a bad price. Then we have the Loki flat above 150, 167 for the sellers, 146 for the buyers. I have a Loki for 150, so again couple million early, but I'm again pretty happy with that purchase. Next up here we've got the Proteus that's coming back down to a less than 150 million range, 150 million for the sellers, 135 for the buyers. It's the least popular one, at rather considering the upside potential, right? We go up to 180, for the Loki we go up to 350, and for the Legion we go up to 190 million ISK. I'd rather have a cheap Legion, a cheap Loki than a cheap Proteus, to be honest. And then finally we've got the Tengu that's continuing the pressure as well. Uppers potential of 250, but keep in mind the rest of the volatility has been much lower. 150 million for the sellers, 141 for the buyers. I could perhaps try to buy one cheap Tengu as well at this point, but I'm pretty happy with those two. I think basically they have the most potential. And so the Tech 3 cruiser market clearly under pressure. I think if you haven't bought one just yet, just to hope for that ride, perhaps on a big Nosek engagement where Tech 3 cruiser fleets find their way in to destruction, that could make a lot of sense for me personally. But again, I'm not gonna buy a dozen Legions or 100 Legions hoping to really cash out on that. It's one of them that I have at what I feel is a pretty competitive price. And that leads us to the extra products for the week, coming in at 58 minutes. And here we are going to take a look at the Tech 1 cruisers. If I'm not mistaken, quite a few of those were announced as the first part of those new proving grounds. So we do have to, I think, take a look at it and see if it has had an impact on those markets. That should be for standard cruisers. We're going to go first with the ones that I really like. Here are the Galente ones. I know that the Vexor is in here. I'm not seeing a speculative jump up. I am seeing them move up from like 9 million ISK, less than that, 8 million ISK at the start of the year, up to 11 million here at the tail end, 11.4 for the sellers, 10 million for the buyers. What is this? This is of course the mineral market. They've become more expensive to produce, and so they've become more expensive to buy as well. But we're not seeing any speculation on this just yet. Thorax, very same pattern, starts at 7.5, ends up above 11 million for the sellers. Let's take a quick look. I don't think they'll be in the lineup. Here is the executor confirming the chart. Celestis confirming that as well. Starts at 5 million, ends up at above 8 million ISK. We'll take a quick look at Minmatar next, because they are basically allies, you could say, although everyone is allies against the Triglavens at this point. But let's take a look at that. Here is the Stabber. You have a little bit of an increase towards the 1-year high points in the last couple of days here, but very same pattern, of course. Starts at 6.25, ends up at 11 million, going for 11 million right now, 8.8 million for the seller's site, flat at 10 million. Rupture, I think, was in the lineup as well, 7.5, and now going here for around 10 million. Actually 11.3 for those sellers. And now we get the Bellicose. Yeah, same thing again. Quickly go through the Caldari ones. Here is the Osprey. Here is the Moa. It's the mineral market, right? I'm not seeing. I think Caracal is in the lineup for the event as well. And then we get the Blackbird, starts at 5. That's actually still pretty damn cheap, actually. 8 million for a Blackbird. And then for the MR ones, we get the Omen, 7.5 to around 11 again. Mauler, that makes it a little bit more visible. Augurer and Arbitrator. Yeah. Okay, I thought perhaps we would see some very noticeable volumes in some of those that I would consider to be very strong potentially. Vexor, for instance, drone ship. I mean, you can make that a kite ship or a short range ship here, going with blasters and things like that. You've got plenty of options, but we're not seeing like a big rush on Vexors. I think basically because they are very cheap, they are massively available, and I think that makes for very good news for people that are looking forward to these new proving grounds. It does mean that here in Jita you'll probably just be able to buy a Vexor with its fit for what would it be, 20? You could go up to like 50 million. I think that still feels like a very reasonable price to dump into like a Vexor or a cruiser, then activate the filament and go do your PvP. That feels like it will be rather accessible, and we don't have any speculative moves on any of these cruisers just yet. Once the event starts, of course, in a couple of weeks, what will that do for the prices of probably what are considered to be the strongest ships in those events? That could be a lot more interesting, but it does look to me like the market's gonna be more reactive rather than proactive in most of these. There could be one exception, if I'm not mistaken. I saw in the dev blog that there's one planned for a single ship. So just one of those Navy issue frigates, I think. MR Navy issue frigates, I think. Let's see if I can find it. Frigates, faction, Navy. Was it Slicer or Cruise? I think it's the Slicer. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was... You can activate filaments to go into the proving grounds, but you have to fly an Imperial Navy Slicer. And here, maybe, is this the volume spike here? A little bit of early buying, just to make sure that you've got a nice stockpile of Slicers available for the event, or that you could sell them at a high price when everyone needs one of those Slicers. That could be the one exception here, showing that if it's a single ship event, you are going to get a pretty big impact on the market in all likeliness. If it's like a cheap category like Tech 1 cruisers, it's not going to move the market proactively. You may see a little bit of a bump in the price temporarily, but I don't think it's going to really change the availability of the ships enough, and that people will be able to enjoy that activity pretty much as they want. That's what I wanted to check for the extra product here. So yeah, I expected that, although I thought perhaps we would see some moves on some of the cruisers that players would have expected to be the best option for the activity. Doesn't even seem to be doing that just yet. That's gonna be it for this EVE talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.